They laughed when she bought a ruined hotel for $20, until she found the door that wasn't supposed to exist. The hotel sat above the town like something people had agreed to forget. Windows broken, doors hanging loose, and inside a hallway where the numbers skipped from 6 to 8, like a piece of the building had been erased. Martha hadn't planned to come back, but once she saw that wall, she couldn't walk away, because something behind it was still waiting. Would you have walked away from that hallway, or stayed to find out what was missing? The room above the laundromat always smelled the same. Not clean exactly, just damp, soap and old water, and something that never quite dried out. Martha Ellison had gotten used to it. She sat by the narrow window with its peeling paint and watched the street below, where the lights flickered on one by one. It was a quiet block now, used to be busier. People coming and going with baskets of clothes, kids running in and out with quarters in their fists. Now the laundromat downstairs had been closed for nearly a year. The machines still sat in rows behind dusty glass, like they were waiting for someone to come back and finish something. No one had. Martha folded her hands in her lap and listened. The building creaked in small, tired ways, pipes shifting, wood settling, a faint hum from somewhere she could never quite locate. She reached into the drawer beside her chair. Slowly. Like she already knew what her fingers would find. The key was cool against her skin. Brass, small, worn smooth at the edges from years of being handled, and then, just as suddenly, forgotten. A thin metal tag hung from it, the number stamped deep enough to last longer than the shine ever had. She held it up to the light. For a moment, it caught the last of the evening sun and gave it back in a dull, tired glow. Martha turned it between her fingers. Once. Then again. There wasn't much weight to it, but she always felt it. Not in her hand. Somewhere else. Somewhere quieter. She didn't remember the exact day she'd taken it. That part had blurred. What she remembered instead was a hallway. Long, dim. The kind that swallowed sound if you walked too far down it. There had been a smell, too. Not like the laundromat. Something older. Drier. Like dust that had been left alone long enough to become part of the walls. And a door. She could never quite see the door clearly in her memory, just the feeling of standing in front of it. Not supposed to be there, knowing it, and staying anyway. She closed her fingers around the key. Downstairs, a car passed. The headlights slid across the ceiling in a slow sweep, then disappeared. Martha leaned back in her chair. She had other things in that drawer. Old receipts. A photograph with the edges curling inward. A button from a coat she no longer owned. Things people kept because they didn't know what else to do with them. But the key was different. She had thrown away better things. Clothes she'd loved. Letters she'd once read twice before folding. Even the little music box her husband had given her on their 10th anniversary. She'd let that go in a yard sale without much thought at all. But not this. She had kept it through moves, through years that filled up and emptied out again, through jobs that came and went, and people who did the same. She had never once tried to use it. Not seriously. There had been a time, maybe 10 or 15 years back, when she'd thought about it. Standing in her kitchen, holding it just like this, wondering if the place still existed, wondering if she could even find it again. She hadn't tried. Life had a way of closing over those kinds of thoughts, like water. She turned the key again. The number caught her thumb 7. It should have meant nothing, Just a number. Just a leftover piece from a job that barely lasted a summer. A place she hadn't thought about in decades, at least not out loud. She had worked there when she was 19 or maybe 20. She wasn't sure anymore. It had been big, though. She remembered that. Bigger than anything she'd ever seen at the time. The ceilings high enough to make her feel smaller than she already did. Floors that echoed if you stepped wrong. People who walked like they belonged there, even if they didn't. She hadn't belonged. Not really. She had kept her head down, done what she was told, stayed out of the way. Except for that hallway. Except for that door. Martha let out a slow breath. She didn't talk about that place. Not to her son, not to anyone. If someone had asked, she might have said she worked in a hotel once, a long time ago. Just a passing thing. Nothing worth remembering. And that would have been true. Mostly. She lowered her hand and rested the key against her palm. It had been years since she'd even thought about why she kept it. These days, she didn't ask herself questions like that anymore. You got older, and certain things just stayed. Without explanation. Without reason. Like the way you woke up some mornings with a feeling you couldn't name, or how a smell could pull you back to a place you didn't even remember going. The key was like that. A small thing. A quiet thing. But it never left. Martha stood and crossed the room slowly, her slippers soft against the worn floorboards. She paused by the window again, looking down at the empty storefront below. For a second, she imagined the lights turning back on. The hum of machines, the low murmur of people talking, someone laughing too loud. But the glass stayed dark. Everything stayed still. She went back to the chair and sat down. The key rested in her hand a moment longer before she slipped it into the drawer. She didn't push it all the way shut. Just enough so she could reach it again tomorrow without thinking. Outside, the last of the light faded from the sky. Martha leaned back and closed her eyes, listening to the building settle around her. There was a feeling she couldn't quite name. Not regret. Not exactly. Something quieter than that. Like a door she had once stood in front of and never opened. She exhaled slowly and let the night take the room. Morning came the way it always did. Quiet, gray, and without asking permission. The light slipped through the thin curtain in a narrow line, landing across the chair where she had been sitting the night before. The drawer was still slightly open. The key was still inside. Martha didn't reach for it. Not this morning. She moved carefully, the way she always did now, as if the day might crack if she stepped too hard into it. The kettle clicked on. The water ran thin and uneven from the faucet. She made her tea the same way she had for years. No sugar, just a splash of milk when she had it. Today, she didn't. She stood by the small sink and drank it while it was still too hot, watching the street below come to life in slow pieces. A delivery truck idled. A man crossed the street with his collar turned up. Somewhere down the block, a door slammed. Martha set the cup down. She dressed with care, not because anyone would notice, just because she always had. Her coat still fit, the brown one with the worn cuffs. She brushed at the sleeve out of habit, though there was nothing there to brush away. Then she picked up her bag. It was lighter than it used to be. She noticed that. She didn't say anything about it. The walk to Maple Street took her 15 minutes. She knew every crack in the sidewalk, every storefront window. Which ones had new signs? Which ones had been empty long enough that the dust had settled into the shape of what used to be there? She slowed as she turned the corner. Even before she saw it, She knew something was wrong. There was a truck parked outside. White, clean, too clean. Two men stood by the back, smoking and talking low. They didn't look at her. Not yet. Martha stopped on the sidewalk. Maple Stitch was still there. The sign hung slightly crooked, like always. The letters faded but still readable. The window display, her last one, still held the same blue dress she'd mended for Mrs. Carver's granddaughter 3 weeks ago. But the door, there was a paper taped to the inside of the glass. Bright. New. It didn't belong. Martha stepped closer. The bell above the door didn't ring when she opened it. That was the first thing she noticed. It had always rung, a soft, clear sound. She'd meant to fix it last winter when it started sticking. Now it just hung there. Still. Inside, the air felt wrong. Not empty, not yet, but disturbed. The men came in behind her without asking. "Ma'am," one of them said, polite in a way that didn't quite reach his eyes, "you're going to need to clear out by the end of the week." Martha didn't turn around. She stood in the middle of her shop and looked. The cutting table, the old Singer machine, the rack of garments waiting for pickup, 3 jackets, a pair of slacks, 1 dress with a hem pinned halfway through. Everything was where she'd left it yesterday. Except it wasn't. There was a thin layer of something over it now, like the room had already started forgetting her. "I didn't get notice," she said. Her voice sounded steady. She was glad of that. The second man stepped forward, holding a clipboard. "It was mailed," he said. "Property changed hands. New ownership. They're converting the block. Storage units, I think." He said it like it didn't matter. Maybe it didn't to him. Martha walked to the counter. Her hands moved automatically. She picked up the small ledger she kept there, flipping it open to the page she'd been working on the day before. "Mrs. Carver, blue dress, hem. Pick up Friday." She stared at the words. Friday wasn't going to happen. "End of the week," the first man repeated, a little softer this time. Martha nodded. Not because she agreed, just because there wasn't anything else to do. They left her there. The door closed behind them without a sound. For a long moment, Martha didn't move. Then she set the ledger down. Carefully. She began with the smallest things. Pins back into their tin. Threads wound tight. Fabric folded along lines she could do in her sleep. She worked her way around the room like she was finishing a job, not losing one. Around noon, Mrs. Carver came in. She stopped just inside the door, looking at the men outside, then back at Martha. "They told me," she said. Martha nodded. "I'll have your dress ready," Martha said, without thinking. Mrs. Carver opened her mouth, then closed it again. "That's not what I meant," she said quietly. Martha didn't answer. People came in through the afternoon. Some to pick up what they could, some just to stand there and look like they didn't know where to put their hands. They all said the same things. "It's a shame. You did good work here. That's how things are now." Martha nodded to each of them. She didn't argue. By evening, the racks were half empty. The room felt bigger, colder. The bell above the door never rang once. When she finally locked up, the key turned too easily in the lock, like it had been waiting for it. She stood there a moment, her hand still on the door. The street was quieter now, lights flickering on in the windows across from her. She looked at the sign one last time, maple stitch. The paint was chipped at the edges. She'd meant to redo it this spring. Martha stepped back. Then she turned and walked away. That night, her son called. He always called in the evening, after dinner, like it was part of a schedule he'd made for himself. "Mom," he said, after she told him, "you don't have to do this anymore." "Do what?" She didn't ask. "I've been thinking," he went on. "There's a place near us. Nice, ground floor. You wouldn't have to worry about anything. You could just take it easy." Take it easy. Martha held the phone between her shoulder and her ear, her hands resting in her lap. "I'll think about it," she said. He sounded relieved. "Good," he said. "That's good." After the call, the room felt smaller, quieter. She sat in the same chair by the window. The drawer was still slightly open. This time she reached for it. The key lay where she'd left it. Martha picked it up and held it in her palm. All day, people had spoken around her, about her, like she was something that had already ended. She turned the key once, then again. There was that feeling again. Not loud, not sharp, just unfinished. She closed her hand around it. Outside, the street settled into night. And for the first time in a long while, Martha didn't feel like sitting still. She stayed by the window longer than usual, not watching anything in particular, just aware. The empty laundromat below, the reflection of her own room in the glass, the faint hum of something electrical still clinging to a place that had already shut down. Her fingers rested on the key. She turned it once. Then she stood up. The movement surprised her. She wasn't someone who did things suddenly anymore, not without planning, not without thinking it through twice, sometimes 3 times. But this time she reached for her coat. The brown one, the one she'd worn that morning. She slipped it on without checking the mirror. Downstairs, the street air felt colder than it had any right to be. The kind of cold that came not from the weather, but from the spaces left behind when something used to be there. She walked. No destination, not at first, just movement. Her shoes made a soft, steady sound against the sidewalk. Familiar, grounding. She passed Maple Street without turning her head. That took more effort than she expected. A block later, the diner came into view. It had always been there. One of those places that stayed even when everything else changed. The sign flickered slightly at the edges, and the windows glowed a warm, tired yellow. Martha pushed the door open. This bell rang. A thin, cheerful sound. It caught her off guard. Inside, the air smelled like coffee that had been sitting too long on the burner and something sweet, maybe pie. The vinyl seats were cracked in places, patched in others. A few people sat scattered across the room, speaking quietly. No one looked up. That suited her fine. She slid into a booth by the window. The cushion sank more than it should have. A waitress came over with a pad in her hand, not writing anything down. "Coffee?" she asked. Martha nodded. It arrived in less than a minute. Black. Hot. Martha wrapped her hands around the mug and let the warmth settle into her fingers. On the corner of the table sat a folded newspaper. Someone had left it behind. She wouldn't have noticed it most nights, would have let it sit there, unread. But tonight, she reached for it. The paper crackled softly as she opened it. Local news, small columns, the kind of stories that filled space more than they filled anything else. She flipped a page, then another. Halfway down the third page, her hand stopped. It wasn't the size of the listing. It was small, almost easy to miss. Just a narrow box of text tucked between a notice about road repairs and an ad for a used pickup truck. County auction, abandoned properties. Martha leaned forward slightly. Her eyes moved slower now, but they were steady. She read the first few lines without thinking much of it. Foreclosed homes, storage lots, a warehouse on the edge of town. Then, her gaze caught on a name. Ridgeview Grand Hotel. Condemned. No minimum bid. Martha didn't blink. She read it again. Then again. The words didn't change, but something else did. Inside her. The diner noise faded slightly, not completely. Just enough, like someone had turned it down a notch. Ridgeview Grand Hotel. She hadn't heard that name in... She didn't finish the thought. Her fingers tightened around the paper. There it was again. That feeling. The same one she had when she held the key. Quiet. Persistent. Unfinished. She looked down at the listing. The address was still there. She knew it. Not clearly. Not in a way she could map out street by street. But she knew the direction. Knew the distance. Knew the feeling of standing in front of something larger than herself. She folded the paper carefully. Not rushing. Not hesitating either. The waitress came back, topping off her coffee. "You want anything else?" she asked. Martha shook her head. "No," she said. "This is fine." She finished the coffee slowly, paid in cash. Left the paper folded neatly on the table, but not exactly where she'd found it. Then she stepped back out into the night. The cold air felt sharper now, more real. She stood there for a moment, looking down the street. Then she turned. The bus stop sat at the corner, a little shelter with scratched plastic walls and a bench that leaned slightly to one side. She walked toward it without thinking too far ahead. A man sat at the far end, hunched into his coat. He didn't look up as she approached. Martha sat on the bench. The wood creaked under her weight. The schedule was posted on the side. She read it. There was a route. Early morning. It went out past the edge of town, past where most people had a reason to go. Her hand slipped into her coat pocket. The key was there. She wrapped her fingers around it. 7. She didn't know what she expected to find. Didn't even know if the place was still standing in any real way. But the thought of not going, that felt heavier. The bus would come in the morning. Martha sat there a while longer, watching the empty street stretch out under the dim lights. Then she stood. Walked back the way she came, up the narrow stairs above the laundromat, into the room that still smelled faintly of soap and damp walls. She didn't turn on the light right away, just stood there in the dark, listening. Then she moved to the chair, sat down. The drawer was still open. She didn't need to look inside. She already knew what was there. Tomorrow, she thought. Not out loud. Just once, tomorrow. Morning came colder. The kind of cold that settled into the bones before you even stepped outside. Martha was already dressed before the light fully reached the window. She didn't linger this time. Didn't sit by the chair. Didn't open the drawer. The key was already in her coat pocket. She checked it once, pressed her fingers against it. Then she left. The bus smelled faintly of rubber and old fabric. Only 3 other people rode with her, none of them speaking. The driver didn't look back when she paid. The road out of town stretched longer than she remembered, the buildings thinning out into empty lots, then into fields that hadn't been touched in a while. Martha watched the landscape shift, not thinking, just noticing. The bus dropped her at a gravel turnout with no sign. "This is as far as it goes," the driver said. She nodded, stepped down. The bus pulled away before she turned around. The silence that followed felt wide. Ahead of her, up a gradual slope, stood the hotel. Ridgeview Grand. It was bigger than she expected. And worse. Windows boarded or broken, paint peeled back in long strips. The front steps cracked through the center like something had tried to split them apart. Wind moved through it, not around it, slipping in and out of the structure with a low, hollow sound. Martha stood still. Her hand rested lightly against her coat pocket. 7. She didn't walk up. Not yet. Instead, she turned away, back toward the road. The courthouse sat 2 miles back in the opposite direction, a low brick building with a flag that hung without much movement. The auction wasn't until late morning. She arrived early. Inside, the air smelled like paper and something faintly metallic. Folding chairs had been set up in rows, most of them empty. A long table stood at the front with a microphone that crackled when someone tested it. Martha took a seat near the back. People trickled in slowly. A man in a heavy jacket with mud on his boots. A woman flipping through a file with sharp, quick movements. 2 younger men who spoke quietly and laughed at things that didn't seem funny to anyone else. Then came another man. He stood out. Not because he was loud, because he wasn't. Calvin Rourke moved through the room like he already knew how everything would go. Clean coat, polished shoes. He nodded to someone at the front and took a seat near the middle. He didn't look at Martha. Didn't need to. The room filled halfway before the auction began. The clerk adjusted his glasses, shuffled papers, and started reading through the list. Properties went quickly. A storage unit, a foreclosed house, a piece of land out near the highway. Numbers moved. Hands raised. Voices calm, predictable. Then, listing number 7, the clerk said. Ridgeview Grand Hotel. A few people shifted in their seats. One of the younger men let out a short laugh. "Still standing?" he muttered. "Barely," the other replied. The clerk continued. "Condemned. No minimum bid." There was a pause. Not long, just enough. Calvin Rourke raised his hand. $20, he said. The number landed flat, like it had nowhere else to go. A couple of people chuckled. "Generous," someone said under their breath. The clerk nodded. $20, do I hear? One more. The voice came from the back. Martha didn't raise her hand right away. She just spoke. Quiet, but clear. The room turned. Not all at once, but enough. Calvin looked over his shoulder. For the first time, he saw her. He studied her for a moment. The coat, the way she sat, the way she didn't move like someone unsure of herself. He smiled, small, almost polite. 30, he said. Martha didn't hesitate. 31. A few more people laughed. Not loud, just enough. It carried. The clerk glanced between them, uncertain for a second, then continued. The numbers went up. Slow on one side, fast on the other. 50, Calvin said. 51, Martha answered. The rhythm changed. People leaned forward now, watching. Not because it mattered, Because it didn't. 75, 76, 100, 101. A man near the front shook his head. "She's serious," he murmured. Calvin leaned back slightly in his chair, still smiling, still patient. 200. Martha's fingers pressed lightly into her coat pocket. She felt the key. 201. The laughter came a little louder this time. Not cruel. Not exactly. Just certain. Like they all knew how this would end. Calvin paused. Not long. Just enough to look at her again. Then he raised his hand once more. 500. The room quieted. That was the kind of number that ended things. Usually. Martha sat still. Her breathing didn't change. Her gaze didn't drop. She had nothing written down. No plan in front of her. Just that feeling. That same quiet pull. She opened her mouth, then closed it. For a second. A small one. Then 501. The silence that followed was different. Not amused. Not yet, something else. Calvin studied her again. Longer this time. Then he exhaled lightly through his nose. Amused now, but not in the same way as the others. He turned back toward the front and lowered his hand. The clerk hesitated. 501. Going once, no movement. Going twice, nothing. Sold. The sound of the gavel was soft, almost unimpressive, but it landed. The room reacted a second later. A ripple, then laughter. Real this time. $500 for that place? Someone said. She'll be lucky if it doesn't fall on her. Should have just let it go for 20. Calvin stood, adjusted his coat. As he passed Martha, he paused just slightly. Good luck, he said. It didn't sound like he meant it. Then he kept walking. Martha remained seated. For a moment. Just a moment. Then she stood. Walked to the front. Signed her name where they pointed. The pen scratched slightly on the paper. Martha Ellison. She didn't rush, didn't look around. When she stepped back outside, the air felt sharper. The laughter followed her out. Not loud anymore, but present. Lingering. She didn't turn around. She looked up instead. Toward the hill. Where the hotel waited. Martha didn't go back to the bus stop. Not right away. She stood at the edge of the road, the courthouse behind her, the low town stretching out in one direction, and the hill rising in the other. The hotel sat at the top like it had nowhere else to go. The wind moved differently up there. She could see it. Long strands of dry grass bending, then straightening again. The broken windows catching light in uneven flashes. The building wasn't just still. It was listening in some quiet, hollow way. Martha adjusted her coat. Then she started walking. The road up was cracked in places, the asphalt broken into rough patches where weeds pushed through. Her steps were steady, though slower than they used to be. She didn't rush. There was no reason to. The closer she got, the larger the hotel became. It didn't rise suddenly. It unfolded. First the outline, then the details. Columns worn down at the base, railings missing sections, a wide porch sagging slightly in the middle. The front doors hung unevenly, one of them pulled just slightly open, enough to let the wind slip in and out. The sound followed her. A low, uneven breath. She stopped at the bottom of the steps. For a moment, she didn't move. Her hand drifted to her coat pocket again. The key was still there. 7. She pressed her fingers against it. Then she climbed. The steps gave a little under her weight. Not enough to be dangerous, just enough to remind her they hadn't been used in a long time. At the top, she paused again. Up close, the place smelled different. Not just dust, something older. Wood that had soaked up years of air and held onto it. Dry rot. Paper. A faint trace of something chemical that had long since faded, but never fully left. Martha pushed the door open. It resisted at first, then gave way with a long, slow creak. Inside, the air changed. It felt heavier still. Like stepping into a room where something had been said a long time ago and never quite settled. She stood just inside the entrance. The lobby stretched out in front of her. Wide, open, broken. Light filtered through the boarded windows in thin, uneven lines, catching dust in the air. The floor was covered in debris, pieces of plaster, fallen wood, the remains of things that had once been arranged with purpose. But beneath all of that, there was shape, order. The front desk still stood, tilted slightly to one side. A staircase curved upward along the far wall, its railing worn smooth in places where hands had once passed over it again and again. Martha stepped forward. Her shoes made a soft crunch against the floor. She didn't wander. Not really. She moved slowly, yes, but not aimlessly. Her eyes shifted from one point to another, not searching so much as remembering. The desk. She knew that. The staircase. She knew that too. Her hand brushed lightly along the surface of the counter as she passed. Dust gathered at her fingertips. She didn't wipe it away. Instead, she turned, looked deeper into the building. The hallway stretched off to the left. Long, narrow, darker than the lobby. Martha stood at the entrance to it for a moment. Then she stepped in. The air felt different here. Cooler. Quieter. Her footsteps echoed faintly, but the sound didn't travel far. It stayed close, like the walls didn't want to give it back. She moved slowly, counting without meaning to. 1. 2. 3. Her breathing stayed even. The hallway narrowed slightly as she went. The walls shifted inward, almost imperceptibly, until the space felt tighter, more contained. Then the numbers. They were still there, faded but visible. Small metal plates beside each door. 4. 5. 6. Martha stopped. Her gaze moved forward. There should have been another 7. Instead, 8. The sequence skipped. Clean. Like nothing had ever been there at all. Martha stepped closer. Her hand lifted. She ran her fingers along the wall between the 2 doors. 6. Then the space. Then 8. The surface felt smooth. Too smooth. Not like the rest of the wall, where time had left its marks, small cracks, uneven patches, signs of wear. Here, nothing. Her fingers moved slowly across it, left to right, then back again. She pressed lightly, then harder. The wall didn't give, but something about it felt wrong. Not broken, not damaged, just different. Like a sentence where a word had been removed, but the space still held its shape. Martha stepped back, looked at it again. The hallway didn't feel empty. It felt interrupted. She turned her head slightly, glancing back the way she had come. The light from the lobby didn't reach this far. The shadows here were deeper. Still, Martha reached into her coat pocket. Her fingers closed around the key. 7. She held it there for a moment. Then she let her hand fall. Not yet. The words came without thinking. Not in her voice, just there. She stepped back again. Her gaze lingered on the space between the doors. Then she turned, walked back toward the lobby. The building didn't feel as silent now. Not exactly. More like it had noticed her. She crossed the floor slowly, moving toward the front doors. The light outside looked brighter than before, sharper. When she stepped back onto the porch, the wind caught her coat immediately, pulling at it like it had been waiting. Martha didn't fight it. She stood there, looking out over the town below. Then she turned once more, looked back at the hotel, at the broken windows, the sagging lines, the weight of it. Her hand pressed lightly against her pocket again. 7. This time the feeling wasn't quiet. Not entirely. Something had shifted. Not finished, but closer. Martha took a slow breath. Then she started down the steps. The wind followed her halfway. Then it dropped away. By the time she reached the road again, the hotel stood behind her like it had closed its eyes. She didn't look back this time. Not right away. Her pace stayed steady, but her thoughts didn't. They moved. Quiet at first, then sharper. 6. 8. The missing space between them. The wall. Too smooth. Too complete. She had seen enough places in her life to know what age looked like, what neglect looked like. That wall wasn't either. It had been done. On purpose. The bus stop sat empty when she reached it. The same crooked bench, the same scratched plastic panels. Martha sat down. Her hands rested in her lap. For a long time she didn't move. Then she reached into her bag. Not for the key, for the folded newspaper she had brought with her. She smoothed it across her knees. The listing was still there. Ridgeview Grand Hotel. Condemned. No minimum bid. No mention of history. No mention of rooms. Nothing about what had been removed. Martha folded it again. Carefully. Then she looked at the road. The bus wouldn't come for another 20 minutes. That was enough time. She stood, turned, and began walking back toward town. The county office sat just past the courthouse. Same building, different door. The sign outside read, "Property Records and Permits" in faded lettering that had once been blue. Inside, the air was warmer, drier. It smelled like paper, old paper, the kind that had been handled so many times it had begun to soften at the edges. A man sat behind the counter, reading something on a screen. He looked up as Martha entered, then down again. "Can I help you?" he asked, without much interest. "I need to see building records," Martha said. "For what property?" "Ridgeview Grand Hotel." That got his attention, just a little. His eyes lifted again. "You bought that place?" he asked. Martha nodded. He leaned back slightly in his chair. "Haven't had anyone ask about that in years," he said. "Most folks just stay away from it." Martha didn't answer. He watched her for a moment longer, then shrugged. "Back room, second row. Files are by decade." She thanked him. Walked past the counter. The back room was narrower than she expected. Shelves lined both walls, stacked with boxes and folders labeled in fading ink. The air felt still, like it hadn't been disturbed in a while. Martha moved slowly, her eyes scanning. 1970s, 1980s, 1990s. She stopped at the older ones, pulled a box free, set it on the table. The cardboard gave slightly under her hands. Inside, folders sat packed together, their edges uneven. She opened the first one, then another. Floor plans, permits, maintenance logs. Her fingers moved steadily, page after page. Time blurred. At some point, the light shifted slightly through the small window above. She didn't notice. She kept reading, comparing, looking. Then she stopped. A floor plan. Faded, but clear enough. Her eyes moved along the hallway. Room 4, Room 5, Room 6, Room 7, Room 8. She held her breath. The paper felt thin under her fingers. Fragile, but real. She placed it flat on the table, then reached for another file. A newer one. Years later. Same hallway. Same layout. But Room 7 was gone. The numbers skipped, just like she had seen 6. 8, clean, like it had never existed. Martha's fingers pressed into the paper. Not hard, just enough. She flipped through more files. Faster now. Searching. There. A maintenance report. Short. Typed. Access sealed per request. Structural modification approved. No details, no explanation, no reason. Just done. Martha sat back slightly. The chair creaked under her weight. She read the line again. Sealed. Not collapsed. Not destroyed. Sealed. Her mind moved quickly now. The hallway. The wall. Too smooth. Too complete. Her hand slipped into her coat pocket. The key pressed back against her fingers. 7. She pulled it out. Set it on the table beside the paper. The number on the tag matched the one on the plan, matched the one missing from the later files. Martha looked at both, then back at the documents. Something had been there. A room. Not forgotten. Removed. The sound of footsteps outside the room pulled her attention back. The man at the counter, moving around, talking on the phone. Normal sounds, but they felt distant. Martha gathered the papers carefully, not taking them, just aligning them, putting them back where they belonged. She closed the box, pushed it back into place. Then she picked up the key, held it for a moment. Longer this time. The weight of it felt different now. Not just something kept, something that fit. She slipped it back into her pocket, walked out of the back room. The man at the counter glanced up again. "Find what you needed?" he asked. Martha paused. "Just a second." "Yes," she said. He nodded. Didn't ask anything else. She stepped outside. The air felt sharper than before, more defined. Like the world had edges again. Martha stood on the steps of the building, her gaze lifted toward the hill. She couldn't see the hotel from here, but she knew where it was. And now, she knew what was missing. Not gone. Not destroyed. Hidden. Her fingers pressed lightly against her pocket 7. This time she didn't wait. She turned and started walking. This time she didn't stop at the bus shelter. She didn't slow down at the edge of town. The road felt shorter now. Or maybe she wasn't measuring it the same way. Her steps carried a different weight. Not urgency. Not exactly clarity. The hotel came into view again as she climbed the rise. The sky had shifted toward late afternoon, the light thinner, stretched across the broken lines of the building. It looked the same, but it didn't feel the same. Martha reached the steps and went up without pausing this time. Inside, the air met her again, dry, still, holding on to itself. She moved through the lobby and into the hallway. 6. Then the wall, then 8. She stopped in front of it, stood there. Long enough for the quiet to settle again. Her hand lifted, pressed flat against the surface. The wall was cool, solid. But she knew better now. Her fingers traced the edges where the plaster met the older structure. There, slight unevenness, a line too straight to belong to age. She stepped back, looked at it again, measured it with her eyes. Then she turned, walked back toward the lobby. The front doors were open now. Not wide, just enough someone stood just outside. Martha slowed. A man. Tall, clean coat, hands in his pockets. Calvin Rourke. He didn't step in, didn't need to. He watched her from the threshold. "You came back quick," he said. Martha didn't answer right away. She walked toward him. Stopped a few feet short. "Yes," she said. Calvin nodded slightly, like that confirmed something he already suspected. "You've been busy," he said. "County office? Records?" Martha's gaze didn't shift. "How would you know that?" He smiled small. "I pay attention to what I buy," he said. "Or what I almost buy." The wind moved behind him, pushing lightly through the doorway. It carried a faint scent of dry grass and something metallic. "You've got a building," he went on. "A condemned one, structurally unstable, no utilities, no insurance, and a list of violations that'll start showing up any day now." Martha listened, didn't interrupt. Calvin took a step closer. Still outside, still not crossing the line. "I can take it off your hands," he said. "Clean, simple, no trouble. You walk away with more than you paid. Everyone wins." Martha's hand rested lightly against her coat pocket. 7. "No," she said. Calvin didn't react immediately. Then he nodded once. "All right," he said. "That's your choice." He turned slightly, glancing up at the building. "You know," he added, almost casually, "places like this don't fall apart all at once. It's slower than that, piece by piece. You don't always see it happening until it's already too late." Martha followed his gaze. The broken windows, the sagging lines, the weight of it. Then she looked back at him. "I'm not planning to wait that long," she said. Something shifted in his expression. "Not much. Just enough." He gave a small nod, then stepped back. "Good luck," he said again. This time it sounded even less like he meant it. He walked away. Down the steps, across the gravel, didn't look back. Martha stood there for a moment. Then she turned, walked back inside. The hallway waited 6. The wall 8. She stepped closer again. Her hand lifted, paused, then dropped. Not yet. She knew it now. What was behind it? Not exactly. But enough. A room. Sealed. Not gone. Her eyes moved along the edges again. Studying. Measuring. The quiet pressed in. Not empty. Full. like something was held there. Then, a sound. Faint. Behind her. She turned. Footsteps. Not close, but inside the building. Martha walked back toward the lobby. Two men stood just inside the doorway now, different from before. Hard hats, clipboards. They looked at her, then at each other. "Ma'am," one of them said, "we're here for inspection." Martha didn't move. "Who sent you?" "County order," the other replied. "Safety review. This place isn't supposed to be occupied." "I'm not occupying it," Martha said. "Doesn't matter," the first man said. "Ownership triggers inspection." He flipped through his papers. Structural damage, code violations, hazard risk. You're going to need to address all of this. He handed her a sheet. The paper felt thin in her hand, but the words were heavy. Deadlines, requirements, consequences. She read it once, then again. "You have a timeline," he said. "After that, it escalates." Martha nodded, folded the paper, slipped it into her bag. The men moved past her, stepping carefully across the debris, already talking in low voices as they examined the space. Measuring, noticing, writing things down. Martha stepped back. Let them move. She stood near the doorway, watching. The building felt different again. Not just quiet now. Observed. Judged. The kind of attention that didn't come to understand. Came to decide. Her hand slipped into her pocket. 7. Outside, the light had started to fade. The edges of the building softened, but the shape remained. Martha stepped out onto the porch again. The wind caught her coat, pulled at it. She didn't resist. Behind her, voices echoed faintly. Clipboards, measurements, lists. Ahead of her, the road stretched back down toward town. Martha stood there for a long moment. Then she looked down at her hand. At the key. Her fingers closed around it. Tighter this time. For the first time, a question pressed through the quiet. Not soft. Not distant. Clear. What if it wasn't there? What if the wall was just a wall? What if all of this, the records, the memory, the feeling, was something she had held on to too long? The wind moved again. Stronger. Colder. Martha lifted her head, looked back at the doorway. At the men moving through the space like they already knew what it was worth. Then she looked down the hallway, where the numbers skipped 6. 8. The space between them. Her grip tightened. No. Not finished. Not yet. Martha turned back toward the building and stepped inside again. The voices in the lobby had shifted farther away. The two inspectors were deep in conversation now, their words echoing off the high ceiling, blending into something indistinct. Clipboards tapped, pages turned, a pen scratched against paper. They weren't paying attention to her anymore. That helped. Martha moved quietly, not hiding, just choosing her steps. She passed the front desk again, the dust still undisturbed where her hand had brushed it earlier. The air felt thicker now, like it had settled after being stirred. The hallway weighted 6. The wall. 8. She stood in front of it again. This time she didn't hesitate. Her eyes traced the edges she had already noticed, the line that was too straight, the surface too smooth, the absence of age. She set her bag down, opened it. Inside, wrapped in an old dish towel, was a hammer. Not large, not heavy, just enough. She had taken it from her kitchen drawer that morning without fully admitting to herself why. Now she knew. Martha held it in her hand for a moment, feeling the weight, balancing it. Then she stepped closer to the wall. The first tap was light. A test. The sound came back dull. She shifted slightly, tapped again. This time, different. Hollow. Not loud, but unmistakable. Martha stilled. Her breath slowed. She tapped once more in the same spot. The hollow sound answered again. There. She lifted the hammer and brought it down. The plaster cracked. A sharp, dry sound that cut through the quiet of the hallway. Dust fell in a thin stream, catching the dim light as it drifted down. Martha froze, listened. The voices in the lobby paused, then resumed. Far enough away. She turned back to the wall, raised the hammer again, struck harder. The crack spread, lines forming outward like something waking up beneath the surface. Another strike, and another, each one louder, each one opening the wall a little more. Chunks of plaster began to fall away now, hitting the floor with dull, heavy thuds. The air filled with dust, dry and thick, clinging to her coat, her hair, the back of her throat. She coughed once, didn't stop. The outline began to take shape, not clearly, but enough. Edges, a frame, something behind what had been forced over it. Martha set the hammer down, reached forward. Her fingers pressed into the cracked surface and pulled. The plaster gave, breaking loose in pieces, falling away. And there, behind it, wood. Dark-aged, intact. Martha stepped back. The dust settled slowly around her. Her chest rose and fell, steady but deeper now. She brushed at the surface again, clearing more of the broken plaster, revealing more. A door. It had always been there. Hidden. Not removed. Not destroyed. Just covered. The handle was still in place. The frame still solid. And at eye level, a small brass plate. Faded, but clear enough. Martha stared at it. For a long moment, she didn't move. The hallway felt smaller now. Closer. Like everything had drawn in around that one point. Her hand lifted slowly, not toward the handle, toward her coat pocket. She reached in, pulled out the key. It looked different now, not smaller, not larger, just right, like it belonged here. Martha stepped forward. The floor creaked softly beneath her. Dust shifted around her shoes. She stood in front of the door, close enough to see the fine scratches around the keyhole. Signs of use, of time. But not recent time. Older. Her fingers trembled slightly as she brought the key up. Not from fear, from something else, something deeper. She paused. Just before the lock, the building was quiet again. Too quiet. Even the voices from the lobby had faded. It was just her, the door, and the space between. Martha took a breath. Then she slid the key into the lock. It fit. Perfectly. No resistance. No adjustment. Like it had never been anywhere else. She held it there for a moment, then turned it. The sound was soft. A small internal click. But it carried. Through the hallway. Through the years. The door didn't open right away. It stayed in place, as if it needed a second. as if it hadn't been asked to move in a very long time. Martha placed her hand on the handle, pressed down. Slowly. The wood shifted, a low creak, deep and reluctant. Then, it gave. The door opened inward. A narrow space at first. Dark. Still. Martha didn't step in immediately. She reached into her bag, pulled out a flashlight, clicked it on. The beam cut through the darkness. Straight. Clean. Revealing. Not ruin. Not collapse. Something else. Martha pushed the door wider. The air inside moved slightly. Not stale. Not like the rest of the building. Different. Sealed. Preserved. She stood at the threshold, the light steady in her hand, her breath quiet. The hallway behind her felt far away now. The inspectors, the town, the voices. None of it reached here. This space had been waiting. Martha stepped forward and crossed the line. The air inside the room didn't feel abandoned. It felt held, like someone had closed the door carefully, not to forget, but to protect. Her flashlight moved slowly across the walls. The desk, the quiet order of things left exactly where they belonged. Names written in careful lines, voices waiting in silence. She set the light down, listened. For years, people had walked past that hallway and believed what was easiest, that nothing was there, that whatever had mattered had already ended. She had almost believed it too. But the room hadn't disappeared. It had just been sealed away until someone bothered to look close enough. Her hand brushed the edge of the desk. Not everything broken is lost. Not everything quiet is empty. And not everything forgotten is meant to stay that way. Outside, the building creaked softly, like it was settling around her again. Martha stood there a long time. Then she turned the light off. And for the first time, the darkness didn't feel like the end of something. It felt like a place that had been waiting. So tell me, what in your life have you walked past, just because everyone else said there was nothing there?